So, good afternoon, everyone, to the lecture 6 of optimization in machine learning. We will conclude our discussion on convex functions in machine learning and then move on to a very important notion of direction which vector, which will take us to first order notions of convexity. Okay, so the direction vector no, discussion on direction vector will help us transition into first order and second order, rather later on second order definitions and properties of convex functions. Um, so we'll begin with our homework problem. We'll do the homework exercise discussion as we do every week, in every class, and then conclude with remaining properties and examples of convex functions. Then we'll move on to the notion of, as I said, direction vector, gradient, subgradient. So this is basically the entire area of subgradient calculus. Um, okay, so we have discussed some of these problems. Um, yeah, let's discuss this important aspect, which is which of the following loss functions are convex. Anyone has any thought on the first problem? L1, L2 regularized logistic regression. Is it convex? And by virtue of which property
Convex.
is convex? Okay. Why is it convex?
So I use the log sum x property to show that the first term inside the summation is convex, and then the summation of convex functions is convex, and the regularizer term is a norm function, so that is also convex. Again, then the entire function is a sum of convex functions, so it's a convex function.
Excellent. When you say log sum x, let's begin with your first point. Log sum x. Um, it's log sum x with what arguments?
So G1x is 0.
Okay, that's a good point. So you have some zeros as well. Great. So this expression, this expression is corresponding to G1, right? So it's exp of minus of yi transpose the zero vector. So is yi into zero vector transpose xi. Is this what you meant? Hello?
I meant that G1x is a constant function 0. Like if we take 0 transpose, then that we're assuming that the argument passed to, I mean G1x, it's exp of G1x, right? Exp of
Okay,
G1x. So
which is zero.
that is
Okay,
the,
but it's
yeah.
the same as what you've written, right? Fine, I got it. I got what you're saying. This is equivalent to what I've written,
Yes, it's equivalent. Yeah.
right? So yeah. So the idea is that proof is a. I mean, so what we are doing is generalization of the log sum x proof. So the GIs, as you rightly pointed out, are either what? Yeah, either zero or what are the other functions? Or linear functions?
Yes, the other function is linear.
Okay, right. Now you could also prove this from first principles. Okay, this can be well complex, but it's going to be the same. And let me just paste what I have written down for a more detailed exposition. but I don't think we'll need to spend time doing that. It's going to be basically a kind of generalization of the alpha beta expression we wrote last time. Is a proof from first principles in case you're interested. So here, as was pointed out, the GIs could be zero or linear functions, and the lambda greater than equal to zero, and we know that the norm theta is a convex function. Right, to prove the convexity of GI theta, again go back to what we did last week. We expressed LHS and RHS both in terms of these alphas and betas, but now we have alpha I theta and beta I theta and so on. But the inequality eventually boils down to the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. So yeah, I mean the finally the inequality will basically get the same inequality as last time. Let me just put that in here. Right, we'll have I've just added more indices. Your log sum theta or theta of alpha I theta beta I theta less than equal to log sum of theta of alpha I theta square raised to half beta I theta raised to square raised to half, and that's basically by Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. Or you could also expand. Okay, the proof um, this holds because of Cauchy-Schwarz inequality. So you can also square LHS and RHS in this case, and show that the RHS will have some additional positive terms or non-negative terms. RHS will all have all the LHS terms. It will have some additional non-negative terms. Okay, you can prove this on first principles, but we'll don't want to keep doing that every time, right? We just want to act smart. Okay, and you might also recall we talked about this midpoint convexity, correct? What was the notion of midpoint convexity?
Like we can just check convexity for lambda equal to half. We don't need to check it for entire range 0 to 1.
Right, exactly. So implicitly we have invoked that convexity that a function is convex if and only if it is midpoint convex. Okay, so
sir, a question here.
hmm.
So if we say that if 2 points are midpoint convex, but it may be possible that
2 points are not, a function is midpoint convex. We say the function is midpoint convex if given 2 points x1 and x2, given any 2 points x1 and x2, the function value at the midpoint is less than equal to the average of the function values at those 2 points. Okay, so again
yes.
let me
So in geometrically it can happen that midpoint is in convex, but
yeah, this is geometrically it can happen. It's not, no, that won't happen. See, we are not talking about arbitrary point. Midpoint is critical because it's actually exactly between the 2 points, right? So that won't happen. So here you see, right, a function f is convex if and only if for all mu in 0 1 and for all x1 x2 in D you have this property, right? Now what we have done in the case of midpoint convexity, right, that is convexity at half, is we say that there are two for alls, right? You're doing two for alls. You have a for all. The first for all is basically for all mu, and then you're saying there's a for all x1 x2. We're saying maybe there is no need for two for alls. You can just do one for all. Okay, so what we have done instead is for all x1, x2, and d, and we are doing away with the first for all. For all mu, we say no for one mu, which is exactly equal to half. Okay, so this relaxes or this tightens the second first for all. Is that clear?
Yes, so I think like you can say that any point in the function can be defined as a midpoint of any other 2 points. So that way it is.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, this can hold even for you can use this definition to also define convex sets. It's a good point. Instead of showing all, it's saying that all points should lie maybe the midpoint, but for all pairs of points. That for all pair of points will already involve other points which are interpolated from right initially given two set of points.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this I mean the proof sketch is basically the if you want to prove this that mu x1 plus 1 minus mu x2 is basically can be written as x1 tilde by 2 plus x2 tilde by 2, where x1 tilde and x2 tilde both can be defined in terms of x1 and x2. And the intuition is very simple. I mean, you have 2 points here. If any point can be, as you said, defined as a midpoint of 2 points in this same set. Okay, so this that the midpoints of some 2 points is x1 tilde and x2 tilde. Okay, so can we move on to the second? So again, I'm summarizing. What we have done so far is we have showed that the regularized logistic regression loss is convex. And why is it convex? Because of log sum f x under certain substitutions. You can also prove, okay, it's a very long proof from first principles. And what have we done here? Based on proof of last basically Thursday, right? But we have just added new 4 indices. We had only alpha and beta. Now we have alpha I, theta, and beta I, theta. Okay, so that's the main idea, and then that implicitly made use of this midpoint convexity. Okay, so we are done with the first part. Again, we'll not be spending all our time proving each of them in detail, but let's look at the second one. Is this convex? L1, L2 regularized multi-class logistic. Okay, this is SVM. I've gone to SVM. We can do the multi-class logistic regression after this. SVMs, is that
Yes, sir. Convex.
by what argument are you saying it's convex?
Pointwise maximum is convex, and then summation of convex functions.
Okay, pointwise maximum, good. Which was discussed in the last class. Pointwise maximum for finite or infinite? When I say max of 0, 1 minus yi theta xi, how many points is a max over? How many functions is a max over?
2. One.
Exactly 2.
One is, yeah.
Right. So that's also fairly straightforward. Any questions here? Okay, so what have we done? It's a simple max over functions. Constant and linear convex, linear function. And therefore it's convex. The second one, of course, is convex. By previous argument, norms are convex. Third case. So yeah, anyone has questions on the second one? Regularized SVMs. I mean, I didn't depict what that max would look like, but I'm assuming all of you understand, right? You can actually, we can show in general, graphically understand or appreciate why the max of convex functions is convex. So I didn't show this last time. Let me do it anyways. So if I have this is a convex function, this is a convex function, this is a convex function, right? So what would the max look like? Yes, draw it slightly in a way that you can make sense of. Okay, so maybe I should show them overlapping, different colors. Okay, so these are. So what would the max look like? Basically, you'll have the wherever one of the functions dominates in a continuous range, you just have that function, right? But wherever at whatever points you have multiple functions being the max, you would probably have inflection, a point of non-differentiability. And now you've seen that it has changed tracks. The max has become another function. And again, it has changed track another point where there are multiple functions which are the same maximum, same value as a maximum. Okay, so this looks convex, right? You can prove it from first principles very easily. This is a graphical intuition.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
The next second term, that is, you are saying that it's linear, but I mean it's affine. So do we need to say that it's because the affine functions are convex?
Yes. Yes. So this when linear affine, the functions are convex. This is
Okay.
convex. And convex is also convex. Sorry, constant is also convex, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I must tell you, algebraic proof is much easier. We have done enough proofs, so I will not be doing this. If you have a question, please let me know. Okay, so this the second one holds by virtue of again properties we have discussed. The third one, what happens here? Any thoughts? Is it convex first of all? Regularize multi-class logistic regression.
Convex.
Convex. And why is it convex?
Linear plus log sum x plus norm.
Okay.
Sum of convex functions.
Right. So it's linear plus log sum x. So it's again log sum x, but it's just more indices, even more indices than earlier, right?
Yes.
Yeah. One thing you should learn now in this course is not be intimidated by lots of indices, lots of thetas, I, j, k. Go back to the basic case, right? Many others are just summations, right? Okay, so this is called yes. The answer is yes, and you could think of this as generalization of the previous case. I mean generalization of the regularized logistic loss case. Can we move on? Any questions here? Next, L1, L2 regularized least squares or lasso, for example, which has L1 norm. Is this convex?
Yes, sir.
For what reason is it convex?
So the first term we use first principles to show that it's convex, and
Okay.
then we can use the summation property.
Okay, so this can be proved to be convex from first principles. Can I use show this as a composition? I try to be lazy here, right? Isn't it a
We
composition
can
of
use f of ax plus b.
okay? Or can I think of this as a composition of x square with a linear function
Yes.
with an affine function?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so the affine function is a square. Sorry, the quadratic function is a x square here, or t square, and the affine function is where you have t equals theta or t I whatever t I square theta transpose x I minus yi. Okay, so we'll try to be lazy wherever possible. So answer is yes, this is convex for this reason. Anyone has any questions on this? Okay. If none, by the way, those who have missed the second and first lectures, we went into great details, defining these objectives for machine learning problems. I think we spent almost 2 lectures motivating all of these. So go back to lectures 1 and 2 for that. What about this function? Matrix completion. Is this convex?
Yes, it's convex.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
why is it convex?
So
No.
AIX will be okay. I'll let someone else go ahead.
Sir, first term, can we do it as a composition itself, like affine and then a norm?
Okay. Yeah. Only thing is now we have gone from vectors to matrices, which should again not intimidate you, right? But you're right. So this is just a affine function. Affine function composed with
No.
right L2 norm. Okay, so that should be fine. That should be a convex function. What about the second term?
It's a spectral norm.
Okay, and what did we understand about it in the last class?
Convex.
Yeah. So it's a norm. What does it correspond to? Is a sum of
Singular values.
yeah singular values. Right. So the sum of singular values which we discussed. What was the more generic norm associated with it? We gave it a name also, right?
Shatton norm or something.
Shatton norm, right? Um, Basically, it's a norm associated with the vector of singular values, and those were always convex. Now we didn't prove again, but we showed that this particular norm also has a connection with another norm, which is it. So it generalizes 2 norms. Oh, sorry, not generalizes. Special case of 2 norms. Which are the 2 norms? One is a Shatton norm. Right, Shatton norm, which is a norm on the vector of singular values. What was the other relation it had? It's also a special case of
Spectral norm.
sorry. Do you remember it's a special case of the
Spectral norm.
yeah it's called spectral norm, but it's a special case of vector induced matrix norm, right? And we saw that it corresponds to yeah from Schatten norm perspective it's a 2 norm of the Schatten norm with a 2 of on the sigma x vector. But the other thing is it's a special case of vector induced matrix norm, right? So you can think of this as over say x not equal to 0 of what the 2 norm, right? Instead of generally talking about a norm, you'll say I'll use, oh I should use a different, let me use v here, v not equal to 0. So I'll have x v 2 norm divided by the 2 norm of v. This is basically a supremum. Remember a pointwise supremum over multiple convex functions, each of which is convex in one of the arguments, which is a convex in x for fx to y. Right, and this is also vector induced matrix norm. So this was given as a example of pointwise supremum. What we saw in the case of hinge loss SVM is basically pointwise maximum. Right, pointwise supremum of convex functions. Okay, so supremum is because you may not attain that bound, but you're upper bounded, right? Whereas just again to make sure you get the point, what we dealt with here is a pointwise maximum. Okay, so matrix completion therefore is also a convex problem, convex function. Okay, so let's move on. If there are more any questions, let me know.
So one
Okay.
question, the
Yeah.
pointwise maximum can work for infinite functions also, right? If we take maximum over infinite functions.
This is I think this is going to be finite. I don't think the result will hold for infinite. I'll have to check, but I don't think so. Those are finite. Under some special cases, it might also hold for infinite. A series of functions, but I don't think it holds in general. I'll need to check. If you remind me, I'll try and check and come back. But from my memory, it holds always for finite functions. Whether it also holds for infinite, there may be some additional condition. For example, I'm sure there must be some. I mean, you need the series to converge, right? If I give you a infinite number of functions, we may need some. I mean, like the gap between those functions becoming diminishingly small. Like you know what is Cauchy series, right? You need some kind of Cauchy convergence. But I'll have to go and check. Okay, is that okay? Very
Yes,
good
sir.
question,
Yes,
though.
Okay.
Very good
and
question. Yeah.
also we can have that. We should have that quadratic gap.
Quadratic gap. That's for strong convexity. That may not be required here. Oh, you mean Cauchy? You want to talk about Cauchy convergence?
No, sir. The strong convergence only.
You don't need strong convexity here. No, this is only, we are only talking about convexity. Yeah, let's not confuse with that quadratic gap. That is, I'm talking about a convert that no. So your point is about convergence of an algorithm. Okay, I'm talking about a question related to maximum, pointwise maximum of an infinite number of functions. Understand? That's different. We are not talking about algorithm convergence of an algorithm. Talking about convergence of a series of functions. Does that help, Sharat?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, let's not confuse. But anyways, I don't want to distract the class. So finite we can always assume. Let's just make it clear. Pointwise maximum of a finite, in this case just two number of functions. Likewise, I would say pointwise suprema of finite number. Let's just make that clear. Okay. Any other question or should we move on? Let's understand the other last homework problem, softmax contextual bandits. Any thoughts on this?
Convex again.
Why do you say it's convex? By the way, what were we interested in maximizing? It may be good to recap. Sorry, what were we interested in? Maximizing or minimizing? Was it a reward or a penalty? It's an inverse propensity estimate of the reward, remember?
Yes.
So it was an inverse propensity of the estimate of the reward function. So what was our goal here? Remember we had this Ri by Pi into 1, which is if action AI is taken by policy that coincides with the best policy as per the theta, the parameters, right? But then we approximated that indicator function with a softmax, right? The exp of theta transpose a xi ai. So what were we doing interested in? We are trying to maximize it. So I mean, moment we talk about maximization, convexity actually becomes a problem. We want convexity here. Function to be maximized. And if you have a convex function, then maximum, I mean, there may be no max at all. It may be unbounded above. On the other hand, we may be interested in whether it's concave, right? Is that making sense?
Yes, sir.
Any thoughts on this? Is it concave? Okay, so it turns out that in terms of theta, this is neither convex nor concave. Okay, so it's not concave, but like PCA, this has efficient solutions. I mean, I won't say exactly like PCA. No. In fact, PCA objective is also neither concave nor convex. Both have, I mean, efficient solvers though. For PCA, you can find the solution exactly. Okay, so this is not concave. So, this, however, will have some regions of concavity and convexity. The issue, as you can see, is becoming because of the denominator here. The denominator also involves a theta. Okay, can we move on? Now there's a one slide I put on the relevance of strong convexity. I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to repeat this. A function is strongly convex if from that function you subtract the quadratic function and you still get a convex function, right? So this mu is called the strong convexity parameter, is going to play an important role in several convergence proofs. It basically is saying that there's a lower bound on the growth of the function, and it implies strict convexity, which is strict inequality in convexity. However, strong convexity doesn't imply that the function is differentiable. Okay, that's another interesting thing. You may think, oh, strong convexity would mean there's a quadratic term added. Does it become differentiable? Not necessarily, right? Anyone can give an example of a strongly
SVM
convex.
loss regularized.
Exactly. Exactly. Good point. Right. So the hinge loss with plus L2 regularization, right? That will be strongly convex. But by virtue of the hinge loss being not being differentiable everywhere, the overall objective is not differentiable everywhere. Okay. And that exactly the reason I have given below, but in an abstract manner. Right. So if F is strongly convex like the hinge loss and G is F is strongly convex like L2 regularizer and G is hinge loss, then F plus G is strongly convex. However, norm x square itself is strongly convex. Okay, and I mentioned last time that strong convexity results in faster convergence using certain descent algorithms. Okay. I mean, certainly it gives you proofs for convergence, but also leads to actual faster convergence. Any questions? So now we move on to the next set of topics. We'll talk about the direction vector, directional derivative. Now I'm detailing the topics in their order. We'll then talk about quasi-convexity. Okay. Now the interesting thing is quasi-convexity generalizes convexity. There are functions which are quasi-convex but which are not convex. All convex functions are quasi-convex. Okay. So quasi-convexity generalizes convexity. And I'll show how. And then we look at the relation between convex functions and sets. That's the next thing. As I said, there is a kind of continuum between sets and functions, and that's that can be best understood through the notion of epigraphs. Now, only thing is a typical course on convex optimization would actually spend a lot more time on this convex functions epigraphs, separating hyperplane theorem, supporting hyperplane theorem, whole bunch of theorems actually. In fact, Farkas lemma. Anywhere you talked about constraints, feasible, strictly feasible solutions, you have to understand you're really dealing with sets. So any mention in literature, right, you should be on the lookout basically for strict feasibility. You're really talking about being strictly lying inside a feasible region, or feasibility, or the mention of Farkas lemma, or you may have strong duality, actually even duality, and so on, would be actually referring to this kind of continuum between convex functions and epigraphs. Okay, so yeah, this just is important to know, which will help us move on to first order convexity conditions and subgradient calculus and convexity. And often when we deal with this, we are really talking about convex regions of functions. Okay, so I just should point out that subgradient calculus is applied extensively even in convex regions of non-convex functions. All deep learning, right? I mean, what does this mean? Even the we have published lots of papers last year, and we have papers in the pipeline where we in top conference like ICML we talk about convergence proofs. But what we do, for example, when we say um, convex regions of non-convex functions, let me give you an example of how you get such a region, right? You'd get such a region by, let's say I have a deep network. Okay. And it'll be nice if you ask questions. I'm now, for example, anticipating some question and saying some things. So let's say you have some deep network. And this is my last layer, okay? The last layer. Now, what happens often is that you freeze weights in all layers except the last layer. Let's say you freeze the weights in this part of the network. Okay, you have a deep network, and this corresponds to frozen weights, frozen parameters. So you could think of this convex region of non-convex functions corresponding to that region which has frozen parameters, right? That is when the pre-final all in with all the pre-final layer parameters frozen, we are often dealing with convex regions of non-convex loss functions associated deep network. Okay, so for example, with subgradients are used all the time, but then the convergence analysis will often require some properties associated with the final layers, or you may talk about local convergence and so on. So this is one example. I'm not saying this is the only use case of. This is a very important use case. That's why I'm highlighting it. This is one use case.
So one question. If
Yeah,
a
please.
CNN or a neural network, let's say, it just uses ReLUs and maxes instead of any other activation function. So it uses ReLU and maxes, then that entire output itself will be convex, right? That we get from the neural network. Like
That's
the
a good
neural
point.
network will be a convex function.
That's a very good point. Yes, if you're using only ReLUs and maxes, you'd get a convex. You should get. I mean, see, you have ReLUs and maxes, but after that, what is the loss function you apply is also going to be important, right? So what will be the loss function?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but if that loss function is also just going to gel well with the max, I mean, basically one of the convexity preserving operations is there in the loss function, you should be fine. Good point. Yeah. Yeah, but this use case I'm saying doesn't even make assumption on the kind of activation functions. I mean, other than the last layer. Yeah. Anything else? Very nice to hear such questions and comments. Okay, let's move on then. We look at the most basic notion of something called the direction vector. Now all of us have experience dealing with derivatives. We use derivatives uh, extensively, right? The whole idea of direction vector is to look at derivatives, but when we deal with a function of multiple arguments, then we can't talk of derivative only of one kind. So every direction that you move in for that function, you're going to basically have to look at derivative in that direction. You will now start really looking at the problem of minimizing. So let's say I want to minimize my function fx. Okay, so all of us know that if you have fx of a single variable, if n equals 1, then f dash x must equal 0, right? That a necessary condition for a differentiable function. Having min at x is that f dash x is 0. Now, how do you generalize this to a function of multiple variables? N equals 5, right? What does that mean? Okay, so let's try and look at this from a slightly different space. Right, so we will look at two examples. I'll actually contrast. Now let me move to the. Let's look at this figure as against a slightly related but different figure here. So let's contrast these two. Are these visible sufficiently?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. So what you see in these figures is the two-dimensional function. Now we can't think of a function in just one dimension, as rather the input space in one dimension. So you have these level curves. fx1, fx1, x2 equals c1 is one level curve, then one in pink. fx1, x2 equals c2 is another level curve in pink. And now you start thinking about, okay, what happens if c1 is greater than equal to c2, right? That means the pink corresponds to values greater than the black. Okay, this is when those regions start looking convex, but you could also have that those regions, the level curves don't look like the boundaries of convex sets. So this is another use case. If x1 equal, x2 equals c2 is this one in black, which is has a non-convex boundary. Okay. So I mean, one thing is we would expect the interiors of level curves to be convex sets in the case of convex functions. I'll talk about the interiors a little more detail where that will lead us to quasi-convexity. But for the time being, I mean, this should be a useful understanding. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this instead of basically of derivative, we'll now say, okay, if I am moving in this blue direction, right, from a level curve C2 to C1, that's a direction. What should happen? If I'm moving within the level curve, what should happen? So let's take the example. If I'm moving within the level curve, what would I expect? A pink level curve. When moving within a pink level curve, what would the derivative f dash x be? Is a function changing at all?
No.
So
0,
it's
I think.
expected. Yeah, right. Likewise, if I just copy the statement, I can have instead of pink, I'll say, okay, when I'm moving within the black level curve. Okay, so the same thing is just changed. You would expect it to be 0 again, right? F dash x. But now when I'm moving from pink to black, that's what I showed in the blue region there. Okay, when moving from the pink level curve, the black level curve, we expect f dash x to be 0.
No.
Anyone? Yeah, we do not expect. So what would you expect it to be? If I told you that C1 is greater than equal to C2, what would you expect that to be?
Positive.
Sorry,
Positive.
positive. You're moving from a higher
Oh,
value
sorry,
to a
negative.
lower value.
Oh, negative, negative. Into black.
Yeah, since C1 is greater than, well, let's say greater than equal to C2, but yeah, I mean, I can just put a less than equal to 0. Yeah, so it might turn out to be 0. That's one thing. So now you see the direction matters. The direction, whether it's the same thing holds for non-convex shapes. Now, only thing is here you can see that no slight change in the direction is going to change things significantly, right? So when you move from this point, I hope you can see this clearly. Yeah, at this point in the pink curve, in the second case, when I move, let's say I decide to move along this direction, I see very different behavior from say in this direction. Sorry, I see very similar behavior in the sense I'm kind of seeing symmetry here. But if I move in the middle somewhere, my behavior I would expect very different behavior. So suddenly there is be a lot of sensitivity. Okay, so when we the direction vector um, will be a lot more kind of unstable or not as continuous as you would expect in the convex case. But I would still expect in local regions there to be some behavior, not only on the condition between increasing values and decreasing values of functions, but also between the curvature and the increasing or decreasing nature of the derivatives. Okay, so what I see, what I wanted to show is here. Let me write down this point clearly. Um, fact, the increasing or decreasing nature of the derivative in a region is also closely connected to the convex or non-convex shape of the function. I mean, instead of calling it shape, I'll say curvature. Okay, so we are not, so direction derivative is important, but also it leads to direct, double derivatives. The double derivative is what the curvature is talking about. Okay. And we want to see be able to handle all this in in dimensional space. Is this clear? The motivation behind this illustration? So so let's summarize the motivations, and I'll copy this to the previous slide. So motivations behind understanding and developing on. It's not just understanding, but developing on directional derivatives. One is design of algorithms. As you can see, for non-convex regions, I may want to look at slightly more than directional derivative. I want to look at, as I said, the curvature. So we want design of algorithms and why certain algos uh, work well for convex functions and certain others don't. And the second is we want alternative definitions of convexity. So we are, I mean, as I said, right, the level curves don't start looking convex boundaries or boundaries of convex regions when the functions are not convex. So we're trying to look at alternate definitions of convexity in terms of first order and say second order conditions. Okay, so any questions? Okay, if not, then let me go back. Okay, so for every point, as I showed, right, we showed these different points. So in this figure you saw this the directions u dash and so on, u1 u2 and so on. So we have different directions. So we'll represent a vector by x and the kth component of x by say xk. So let's say uk be a unit vector pointing in the kth coordinate axis. So that means if you are pointing if uk is pointing the kth coordinate axis only, then ukk is 1. Only the kth component is 1 and all others are 0. So that's what I was trying to show in this figure here. U1 is in the first dimension, U2 is in the second, and so on. Okay, so this is the image you're talking about. Sorry. Okay, so an arbitrary direction vector is a vector with some unit norm. So we don't want to deal with the scale component. We only want to deal with direction, right? So unit norm is so that we can focus on the direction alone. Let me make that comment here. Okay, so with this background, let's try and understand a little bit more. So we define the notion of a directional derivative, and in fact, I would like your help in defining. How would you define the directional derivative? You would need a point x, and you would need a unit vector. As I said, we'll not deal with scale component. So what would it be? Well, you could go to the first principles. Direction of derivative. How would you do it? You need something, some limit tending to 0. Limit of what tending to 0? Some scalar, right? Scalar tending to 0.
Some like KH.
Yeah, you can call it h, whatever. Some scalar tending to 0. Correct. Of x plus scalar,
HV.
scalar times v, right? Of x divided by f of the, not f, by the scalar itself. Okay, so that's, you can give it a name. The scalar can be given a name. But this idea is that you're going from x here in the direction of v, but you want to say how much is a rate. Okay, so this is called the dv along the rate of change along the vector v of the function f. Okay, so this is the overall. I mean, I used small. Sorry, I used small d here. I should use capital. Let me just be consistent. The next slide. Okay. This is a directional derivative. The only thing is you are assuming the limit exists. Okay. So what is the relation between the directional derivative and the gradient? Any thoughts? So directional derivative is a scalar. Gradient is a vector. Any thoughts?
So if we take the directional derivative along the different unit vectors, u1, u2, so on up to uk, and then those will be the components of that gradient vector.
Okay,
Like,
very good. Good. So directional derivative along each unit direction component unit direction will give the different components of the gradient vector. That's one
I guess
important.
direction derivative can be defined as the inner product between gradient and the unit vector.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying you can obtain the directional derivative along v as at x at a point x, right? As dot product between gradient at x and with v. Dot product between v and, okay, let me just change the order, between v and the gradient at x. Okay, that's interesting. Any other fact? The second fact is dfv is the gradient of, or rather, v transpose any other point. A third point. I mean, I think by now you have enough intuition. What is the direction along which the directional derivative is the maximum? Maybe you can look at the previous step too. The direction along which the directional derivative will be the max would be what?
Gradient.
It's a gradient is the direction with maximum directional derivative. Okay, that's basically the basic motivation behind gradient descent. Yeah, but we'll see how why we need to depart, why we need departures from gradient descent if this motivation is there, and is there an issue? And we'll see that soon. Okay, but these seem to be fair motivations. Very good. Okay, so in fact, the next slide we'll develop on this. As a special case, the directional derivative reduces to the partial derivative of f with respect to xv. So a partial derivative, by the way, is just a scalar, right? It'll give a scalar value. So if you take the unit directions, that's exactly what our point number 2 was earlier. Oh, sorry, point number 1 was directional derivative along each unit direction. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. So we are just giving it a name, UK. Unit direction UK. Q superscript K. The partial derivative. Okay, good. So that's point number 1. If fx is differentiable, then f has a directional derivative in the direction of any unit vector v. Then we come to the third point. Oh, sorry, the second point, which is that the directional derivative can be obtained as dot product of the gradient and the vector. Okay, so we seem to be going in the same order. Yeah, so this is now formally defined. And the third point, which I mentioned, will also be built upon soon. The third point is easy to get from the second point, right? Point 3 follows from point 2 y. By which result?
Dot
Anyone?
product is less than L2 norm. square.
Yeah, and equality less than equal to, and equality holds only when the two are in the same direction, right?
Yes, yes.
Can I say it holds from Cauchy-Schwarz?
Yes.
Okay, so what is Cauchy-Schwarz inequality? That if you have U transpose V, the absolute value is less than equal to norm of L2 norm of U into the L2 norm of V, with and equality holds if and only if U equals V, right? I mean, there one is a scale version of the other. Okay, so now just replace our U with the gradient vector. So we are saying equality holds only if the gradient is a scalar multiple of V, or V is a scalar multiple of the gradient, which means the direction, the maximum, the upper bound, the right hand side is obtained exactly when U and V are in the same direction. Okay, so okay, any questions? So if you have none, then we'll move on to the next topic. We will be, I mean, we'll do more about this once we talk about sublevel sets. So just keep this picture in mind. We'll revisit it. But let's understand what was going on inside these sets. Okay. I kept saying the boundaries of these sets, the boundaries of these sets, but boundaries of what sets? Okay, those we are talking about boundaries of something called sublevel sets. So what set sits inside here is the sublevel set, and that's what we'll talk about. Okay, so let's give it a name here. This set is a sublevel set. And I'll kind of give you an idea why it's called sublevel. It may not be always the case, but here we are. I mean, here we are understanding that C1 is greater than or equal to C2. So as you keep on, I mean, with the assumption that as you keep shrinking C2, you'll go further within the set, right? This set is called a sublevel set. So let me write that in English, plain English. Meaning that as E1 is as C reduces to below C1, the level curves only tend to keep being contained inside called the sublevel set, or a sublevel set. I'll define sublevel sets in more general. Is this clear? So this part is related, and we now delve a little bit more on sublevel sets. Okay, so I'm just going to draw this picture again here. And I made this point earlier. When you have convex functions, interiors of level curves are expected to be convex. Okay, so this is now kind of formally being dealt with here. So L alpha f is all the x in the domain such that fx is less than or equal to alpha. Right, so you had the C1 here. As fx keeps going less than C1, you should get this set inside. This is called an alpha sublevel set, or in this case, it's called a C1 sublevel set. Okay. C1 sublevel. Instead of just saying alpha, I'll say C1 sublevel set. Okay, so what do we expect if f is if a function f is convex? What would we expect? I made this point here, right? I mean, we made this point earlier, the interiors of convex sets are expected to be convex. So what would you expect from the sublevel set, alpha sublevel set?
It should be convex.
Right. So then we expect the sublevel, the L alpha to be convex. Now L alpha to be convex for what? What values alpha? L alpha F expected to be convex. Fine. For what values of alpha? Anyone?
For those values such that this set is actually an interior of a level curve.
Yeah. Yes, but you have to specify something in terms of scale. So you're kind of making it cyclic, right? For all those will be in the interior. But if it's convex, shouldn't that happen? That for any value of alpha, the points will all those level curves will lie inside. If that's the case, then what should I say? For what values of alpha? For all?
Spec is greater than minimum of f.
Why can't I just say for all alpha?
And yeah, yes.
Just say for all alpha. And I'm instead of saying expected to, can I make a claim? I say it will be convex. I mean, it will be necessarily convex, so we are not giving it a choice. Anyone? Does it make sense? I mean, how do you prove this?
So you can do it this way, I guess. I mean, f of x1 is, I mean, if x1 and x2 belong to L alpha, then fx1 will be less than alpha and fx2 will be less than alpha. We can take like f of lambda x1 plus 1 minus lambda x2, and since f is convex, that will be less than lambda fx1 plus 1 minus lambda fx2, and both of which are less than alpha.
Okay, good point. So the proof is what you're giving me. You said if I have used theta x1, right? F of theta x1 plus 1 minus theta x2, right, is, let's say, less than or equal to, I mean, this is the definition of convexity. Fx1 plus 1 minus theta fx2. Let's say if, let me use a different color. So let's say if x1 comma x2 are in L alpha f, right, then what happens? The first term we know is less than or equal to theta alpha. The second term I know is less than or equal to 1 minus theta alpha, right? So this whole thing basically implies is what? That theta what will happen? So we want to show that this convex combination is also less than or equal to alpha, right? So this whole thing is therefore less than or equal to alpha, right? Theta alpha plus 1 minus theta alpha is less than or equal to, is the same as alpha, right? So this will mean that theta x1 plus 1 minus theta x2 is also in L alpha f. Does it make sense? This expression. Because this alpha is also going to be less than or equal to, I mean, if you want, you can make this explicit. I didn't write it down. Let me just write it if you want. Say this is therefore less than or equal to alpha, which implies that by that pink, by virtue of this pink part, right? If x1, x2 and alpha is the same as saying fx1 is less than or equal to theta alpha, less than or equal to alpha, and if x2 is less than or equal to alpha if x2 is in L alpha f. So is this clear? Any questions? We kind of anticipated the proof and now we have proved something, but let's go to the actual proof. Let's go to the actual statement. Okay. So if a function f is convex, its alpha sublevel set is a convex set. Okay, and this is a proof. What I showed is a proof basically. But let's try and understand this pictorially also. What's really happening? I've given you some example, but let me take an example. So let's consider the following image. Okay, so you have this image x2, x1 are the two coordinates. You have fx1 comma x f of x1 comma x2, and you're shown this function. Now this is a convex function. Now what we are trying to show here below are these sub-level sets. They align the x1 x2 plane, and as you can see, for example, the pink one is L alpha f. The one in blue would be what? Would be an L alpha 1, let's say. What's the relation between alpha 1 and alpha? Any thoughts? Would you expect alpha 1 to be less than or equal to alpha?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah, so as you go down inside, then the alphas keep shrinking. So not alpha 2, alpha, yeah. Alpha 1 is less than or equal to alpha. Okay, so these are shrinking sub-level sets. And basically what you're saying is, okay, I can just show the same thing in a slightly different. I didn't show the graph of the function, I just showed the shaded region, but you can understand this to be the graph of the function. Because as you're decreasing the value of alpha, you're really looking at lowering the y-axis. Okay, so shrinking alpha means lowering the y-axis. Not y-axis, I mean the function axis. Downward movement along the function axis. Let me just use different colors here. What I'm saying. So shrinking this alpha 1. Okay, are there any questions? So this should help and help you appreciate the behavior of sub-level sets. Question is, what about the other way? Can I say that if the sub-level sets are all convex, then the function is convex?
No, sir.
Okay, so let's I'll put a good point. So you're saying it's no, but I would like to know why. Okay, so question is, if or some, I don't know, I mean if all sub-level sets of a function are convex, um is it implied that the function itself must be convex? And you're saying the answer is no. Anyone feels it's the answer is yes? I mean, look at this picture, right? It seems to be hinting that okay, there's strong connection, but it's just between convexity of the sublevel sets and the function's convexity, right? Function's convexity is like it's cup shaped, but is it as tight? Okay, so how do you prove? Whether it's yes or no. If it's a no, how would you prove? What would be your attempt to prove?
Counter example.
Counter example.
So by graphically we can say that.
Okay, you can try graphically show a counter example. I mean, graphically in the sense it would be to give you the lead, but ultimately you'll need a counter example, right?
Yes. And
Okay,
also
so
mathematically you can say that if we have a non-convex function, so within it we can have subregions which are convex. Like there can be regions where there are 2 points and all convex combinations lie within a region. So
okay,
Like simple counter example would be log of mod x.
log of mod x. Okay, let's try attempt that. How would you prove it's what is the shape first of all?
Uh, like log x on both sides of the axis. Sorry, y-axis.
Okay, so log of mod x, you're saying it's not convex, right? Log is anyways not convex, it's concave. But you're now trying to prove
Yeah.
that log of mod x is has all
Convex level sets.
convex sublevel sets. What would they correspond to? Let's write down. So log of the absolute value of x less than equal to say alpha 1 would mean what? Is equivalent to saying what? And here we need equivalence is the same as
Mod x less than or equal to e power alpha 1.
and then
This set is convex for all alpha.
so this is basically like a but it's
Straight line
absolute
segment.
value of x.
Yeah,
So
it's a line
is it
segment.
convex?
Yeah, the line segment in one dimension is a convex set.
Correct. So it's basically a line segment between minus alpha and plus alpha minus e raised to alpha 1 and plus e raised to alpha 1, right? Okay, so this region is convex. Whereas the function doesn't look convex, right? That should be again easy to see for everyone. Okay, good example. In fact, you'll find lots of examples of this sort. So this is, I think, a canonical style. So you can see that inequality is just sometimes, simplifying the set of constraints that convexity had, which was we wanted the function to lie below the line segment joining 2 points. Now that function that is going away by collapsing to saying okay, all the points with function value less than some threshold, right? So that could still be convex as you saw here. Can you think of anything else? Any other function? Continue here. I mean, there are more functions, and here's one example. Actually, lots of functions, right? This is fx equals x2 divided by 1 plus 2 x1 square. Right? So now it's not that this function has all sublevel sets to be convex, but say the zero sublevel set of this function is convex. So yeah, so you can have some number of sublevel sets as convex, but in some cases all of them are convex. Yet the function may not be convex. Okay. So on the previous slide, even if all the sublevel sets of F are convex, in not being convex itself. Okay. So it turns out that such functions have a name. Functions which have all sublevel sets to be convex sets. However, every such function is not convex. Such functions are called quasi-convex functions, right? But we have to remember that that doesn't imply convexity. So this is called quasi-convexity. And as homework, I would like you to think about this. Okay, this is homework for you. Might be an interesting plotting exercise. Try plotting, try inspecting the negative of the normal distribution. Okay, so I mean, all of you have seen the normal distribution, multivariate normal distribution. Just draw a small here. This is how the normal distribution looks like, right? It doesn't look convex. If you, I mean, or inverted, it doesn't look convex. You take the negative of this. But it turns out that all its sublevel sets are convex. Okay, so try inspecting and plotting its sublevel sets. Internalize it a bit. So how do you prove that this function, for example, is quasi-convex? And why is it not even convex? What can you do? Okay, so we'll probably leave it at that. Any other questions or comments? So we reached the threshold of time. There are no more points for discussion, questions or comments. We will conclude now. Yeah, so this is the only homework problem for next week. That's for Thursday. Thanks everyone. Bye. I would like to appreciate the class participation. This is very good class participation.